Mark IV Imperial Maximus suit. At the end of the Great Crusade, the Space Marines found their armor wearing out. While some legions chose to continue local production and maintenance, the Mechanicum of Mars started to design a new variant for centralized issue, which was to be designated the Mark IV or Imperial Maximus suit. At the Mark IV stage of the power armor development, Space Marine armor began to take on an appearance recognizable as contemporary power armor. The main change being the abandonment of the separate abutting plates in favor of larger and flexible armor casings incorporating flexible joints. This marginally reduced mobility, but was far easier to produce and maintain. Technical secrets recovered on newly conquered worlds allowed Mars to develop the more efficient armor, improving the quality of protection and reducing the suit's weight at the same time. Improved armoring of the power cables allowed the main arm and chest supply to be safely relocated to the exterior of the armor, while the use of new material reduced the size and number of cables. The helmet was a completely new design, the basic shape inspired by the sweeping front of the Mark III. In Mark IV and later versions, the helmet is no longer fixed, but moves with the wearer's head. This represented the constructor's increasing experience with neural connector gear and the new materials which flooded into the Martian workshops as the Crusade progressed. Mark IV armor was envisioned at the time to be the ultimate and final type of Space Marine armor, able to offer the best protection in a variety of conditions. Many of the Space Marine legions were entirely or partially re-equipped with it, although the order of which legions received the armor would shortly prove to be of significance. As a result of its widespread production and use prior to and during the Horus Heresy, Mark IV suits are the most common of the pre-heresy armor marks still in service during the 41st millennium. The pattern was initially most widespread in legions that were favored by War Master Horus, and thus would become synonymous with Traitor Astartes. Notably, a few chapters, such as the Red Scorpions and Iron Hands, are still capable of producing new Mark IV suits in the 41st millennium. The round nozzles on either side of the backpack are not only for heat dissipation but also could be used as stabilizer jets in zero-gravity conditions. Specific Mark IV patterns, Achaean pattern helmets and shoulder pads were a variant Mark IV Maximus battle plate design of the Thousand Sons Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. They were produced by the forges local to Prospero exclusively for this legion and used often by legion veterans. Kader Renissum pattern, a sub-pattern of the Mark IV used by the World Eaters, most notably Kader squads. Praetor pattern. The Praetor pattern was a type of Mark IV variant used by the Ultramarines during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy. Produced at Viridia Forge, it was not an accepted mark of the Greater Legions Astartes by the time of the Battle of Calth. Seeker pattern, a sub-pattern of the Mark IV used by the Seeker squads and headhunters of the Alpha Legion. Mark V Heresy armor. The equipping of the legions was only partially complete when the Horus Heresy broke out. Many of the legions that had just been fully equipped with Mark IV armor turned against the Imperium, while many of the loyal legions had been deliberately starved of access to it and remained operating with the older Mark II and Mark III armor. Additionally, even the legions equipped with Mark IV suits quickly found themselves low on spare parts and unable to manufacture replacement units. With war damage and mobile operations, resupply for damaged equipment was difficult or impossible. Marine artificers and tech marines had to use old-style equipment from older models to keep the legions fighting, as well as salvage from slain enemies and unorthodox innovations of their own. This ad hoc assemblage of various armor mark segments, including new or unethical design elements, being created by a multitude of legions, resulted in an entirely new mark of armor being accidentally created. These previously non-standard emergency/stopgap designs were retroactively termed as the Mark V once production of the Mark IV was halted and the design for the subsequent Corvus armor mark, Mark VI, was finalized. Some form of standardization across Mark V suits is notable, despite their apparently random creation and individual varied origins, due to the dissemination of molecular bonding techniques across the legions. These techniques were developed due to battlefield experience in fighting other Astartes. Astartes' plate needed to be proof against their own penetrator weapons, and it was discovered that power armor would benefit from additional reinforcing in this regard. All sorts of improvised additional armor can be seen on Mark V suits, but the most common technique was affix additional layers of armor with the aforementioned molecular bonding studs. This relatively quick and simple technique effectively added another ablative layer to marine armor suits. The extra weight this generated would prove considerable, however, which placed a strain on power supplies. As the addition of extra power generation sources and cabling would just require more armor plating, catching the design in an eternal circle, the wearers of the suit was forced to either deal with the additional weight, or turn up the power output of his backpack but suffer extreme heat output, which not only would prove uncomfortable and even compromising in certain situations, and in many cases older, heavy power cabling was used, which created a weak point on the chest. Many Mark V suits ended up featuring an unusual helmet design appropriated from supplies generated by the Tactical Dreadnought Armor program. This spin-off helmet featured similar levels of improved auto-senses as Terminator suits, but was still found to be inferior to those of Mark IV suits. The respirator used for this helmet was codified as the Montilla pattern, and saw use as early as late M30. The Mark V would be the most common armor mark visible during the Horus Heresy, by its nature as a mark resulting directly from the concerns of that galactic civil war. As a result, the Mark V is commonly called the Heresy suit and is distinguished by the molecular bonding studs often seen on areas such as the helmet, shoulder plates, and greaves. Few Imperial Space Marines are ever seen in Mark V suits today, as the Loyalist chapters either broke up these suits for spares or purposefully destroyed them after the heresy was over. In contrast, many Chaos Space Marines still wear Mark V armor by default, either because they still possess their original suits or because they are forced to scavenge equipment. The Mark V became most prevalent in the Shattered Legions due to their more desperate situation. This power armor carries resonances of the Imperium's darkest hour and its greatest victory. Battle Brothers will offer the wearer their respect. However, members of the Inquisition are instinctively suspicious of any connection to the Horus Heresy. Production Mark V is the most widely recognizable form of Mark V, and consists of elements of power armor that most legions were able to manufacture in their own forges, or otherwise obtain themselves, falling back on common designs for parts that had specific cross-compatibilities, often deriving from Mark IV, V, VI, and later Mark VII. Non-production Mark V is a genuine amalgamation of field modifications, combining several different marks of armor in ways no tech priest would ever think to sanction. In general, Mark II and III components can be combined without issue, as can those of Marks IV, VI, and the much later Mark VII. Parts outside these two distinct groups can only be combined with one another with great difficulty, however, and so this was often only seen in the more technically adept legions such as the Iron Hands and Salamanders, in particular those elements of the Shattered Legions that were cut off from ready sources of resupply in the wake of the treachery at Istvan V.